The room was quiet, yet every eye was alert. Meghan Markle, casually sipping water, let slip a phrase that would ripple through the corridors of power far beyond Hollywood's sunlit studios. "Archie has more spark than George. He was made for the spotlight." 12 words offhand, almost maternal, yet laden with consequence. The audience of strategists, publicists, and media operatives immediately sensed it. This was no idle boast. In a room dense with recording devices, the remark would echo long after the summit ended. For Buckingham Palace, it was not a rumor, it was a provocation. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and keeps you up to date as everything unfolds. And while you're here, let us know, where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. It's wonderful to see viewers joining us from around the world. Within hours, aides at the palace were quietly notified. Meghan's comparison, subtle to some but unmistakable to insiders, had breached a threshold. No statement was issued. The monarchy acted in silence. By the end of the week, the official royal website reflected a change that few outside the palace walls would notice immediately. Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilith Diana Mountbatten-Windsor were removed from the 6th and 7th positions in the line of succession. No announcement, no press release, no footnote. Their names simply vanished. To the untrained eye, it might appear as a clerical error. To those in the inner circle, it was a deliberate, thunderous signal. The crown had drawn a line. The origins of the tension stretched back years, long before Meghan and Harry's public departure. The narrative of Archie's birth had been carefully curated. A May 6, 2019 arrival at Portland Hospital, London, photos carefully staged, a promise of privacy. To the public, the story was straightforward. A royal baby, a new generation, a familiar page in an ancient play. But beneath the polished veneer, complications brewed. By mid-2025, a confidential leak reached the Parliamentary Office for Constitutional Integrity. Documents previously sealed revealed the truth about Archie's lineage. A scanned intake form from Santa Barbara Fertility Center, dated April 18, 2019, identified surrogate A as maternal source. Meghan's name appeared not as biological mother, but as intended parent. In one stroke, the crown was faced with a constitutional challenge. Archie was not born in the United Kingdom, nor of the body of a royal consort. Under the Act of Settlement 1717, this made him ineligible for succession. For years, the palace had maintained a careful silence. Questions about Archie's baptism were politely deflected. No formal ceremony had been approved by the Church of England. A single grainy photograph showed Meghan, Harry, and Doria Ragland with the infant before a fireplace. To the public, it seemed protective. Internally, it was a quiet emergency. At the Sandringham Summit in 2020, Clause 7, Paragraph 3 of the Protocol Agreement allowed the palace to withhold scrutiny of Archie's origins in exchange for the Sussexes' withdrawal from official duties. It was a silent truce, a balance of discretion and separation. But peace was fleeting. Meghan's 2021 interview with Oprah, followed by the 2022 Netflix documentary series, shattered the truce. Accusations of coldness and institutional racism fractured the compromise. By late 2025, a review of the sovereign grant revealed financial anomalies, surrogacy fees, legal contracts, and medical payments totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, traced to the Frogmore Cottage renovation budget. Public funds intended for refurbishment had been redirected to surrogacy expenses. The palace now faced a dual crisis. Succession legitimacy and financial irregularity simultaneously threatened. Within Buckingham walls, urgency replaced restraint. The Queen's advisors, led by Princess Anne, prepared a legal recalibration. Letters patent amendments were drafted to reinforce succession rules. Only children born of a lawful biological union between a royal descendant and a recognized spouse would inherit titles and privileges. The language was unambiguous. Retroactive exclusion was necessary. By January 18, 2026, the amendment was signed. Within 36 hours, Archie and Lilith's names were absent from the royal website. Palace insiders whispered of closure, while Meghan's camp framed it as petty vengeance. Constitutional historians recognized the act as consistent with precedent. The shift was not merely administrative. It was symbolic, a definitive assertion that tradition, not sentiment, governed the monarchy. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis retained their status as direct heirs. Archie and Lilith, though beloved, were not recognized under law or custom. For Meghan, the move was devastating, a perceived betrayal masked in protocol. The palace, however, regarded it as clarity. The institution endures by principle, not popularity, by duty, not claim. Outside the walls, the media speculated, social media buzzed, and the public remained largely unaware of the legal precision underpinning the action. Yet the internal message was clear. Succession is sacred, immutable, and guided by centuries of precedent. The palace did not speak, yet it was not silent. In the days following the quiet removal of Archie and Lilith from the line of succession, courtiers and aides orchestrated a series of moves designed to communicate without words. Every gesture, every public appearance was a deliberate act, a statement in the language of legacy and authority. On February 16th, Princess Catherine appeared at a charity event in Leeds, focusing on childhood education. Her attire alone spoke volumes. The Jubilee Star brooch, rarely seen outside of sovereign ceremonies, gleamed against her navy sash. Observers immediately understood its significance. George, Charlotte, and Louis represented continuity. Tradition, inherited responsibility, and honor were now visually codified. In parallel, the palace worked behind closed doors to reinforce legal and symbolic boundaries. The Windsor Charter of Succession was quietly amended with a private addendum, reaffirming that hereditary titles, ceremonial privileges, and public roles could only be extended to the direct descendants of Prince William and Princess Catherine. These measures were not new law. They were reinforcement, a visible and documented assertion that precedent and duty outweighed personal grievance. For Meghan, however, the world she had hoped to construct, one in which Archie's brilliance eclipsed George's, was beginning to crumble. The absence of an immediate, visible response from the crown was strategic. The palace understood that action cloaked in silence carried weight far beyond words. The media, sensing the tension but unaware of the full scope, speculated wildly. American outlets, citing unnamed sources, framed the palace's silence as indecision or suppression. Meghan's allies amplified the narrative, emphasizing injustice and inequality. Social media erupted with hashtags, #NotMyPrince, Royal Grift, Archie vs. George. The British public, meanwhile, watched with a mixture of fascination and growing fatigue. For many, the spectacle of comparison between children of different mothers in different continents was unsettling, even grotesque. Royal historians cautioned against conflating emotional interpretation with constitutional reality. Succession, they reminded the public, was never about sentiment. It was a framework centuries in the making. Amid this swirling storm, Meghan escalated. Archewell Enterprises quietly registered a trademark for the Royal Reclamation brand, introducing a line of children's books, apparel, and storytelling products designed to highlight perceived injustices. One picture book, thinly veiled, mirrored the narrative she had propagated. A dark-haired boy overlooked by a royal court while a blonde heir is celebrated. The allegory was unmistakable. Palace aides recognized the imagery immediately as a strategic provocation. Legal teams mobilized to assess potential violations of royal intellectual property and symbolism. Internal memoranda circulated, warning that the unauthorized use of royal emblems, even in storytelling, could not be tolerated. Simultaneously, Meghan leveraged media appearances to reinforce her narrative. A fireside discussion in Santa Barbara highlighted heritage, legacy, and the denial of recognition to her children. She never directly named the royal family, yet her intentions were clear. The palace noted each statement, each publicized clip, each social media post. Every act was recorded, evaluated, and positioned within a broader strategy to safeguard institutional integrity. The contrast could not have been starker. Meghan amplified comparison, while the crown fortified continuity. Prince William and Princess Catherine, attuned to both symbolism and optics, responded subtly but decisively. Public appearances, carefully choreographed, showcased George and Charlotte in roles reinforcing tradition and succession. A school visit with Charlotte revealed a red folder bearing the golden seal of the future of the Crown Education Trust. No words were needed. The act itself spoke. Across digital platforms, Commentators and royal enthusiasts interpreted the gestures clearly. Continuity, stability, and earned status were unbroken. George's path was not defined by the absence of Archie, but by the fulfillment of inherited duty. In California, Harry watched the unfolding events with growing unease. For weeks, he had remained largely invisible in public. Rumors swirled about private consultations with advisors in London. Sources later confirmed a brief but critical meeting with Princess Anne at Gatcombe Park. The message was terse and unequivocal. Reconciliation was impossible while narrative warfare continued. "One cannot reconcile with tactics," Anne reportedly stated. The phrase, brief and precise, quickly spread across British social media, underscoring that the palace's response would be measured but absolute. Even as Meghan continued her campaign of visibility, a subtle counter-narrative emerged. The Crown, leveraging centuries of protocol and precedent, emphasized presence over rhetoric. Every ceremonial act by William, Catherine, and their children, be it attendance at Trooping the Colour, participation in charitable initiatives, or engagement with civic events, reinforced legitimacy. Meanwhile, attempts by Archewell to frame the discussion as a moral or racial imperative began to falter. Sympathetic media outlets noticed the careful choreography and reframed coverage. This was not about exclusion. It was about continuity, service, and earned roles. The palace's strategy was deliberate. Let action, not reaction, tell the story. The simmering tension between the Sussex campaign and the Crown entered a new phase. As Meghan's royal reclamation brand gained public visibility, the palace escalated its internal protocols. Legal teams meticulously audited every trademark, every promotional image, every children's book illustration. A dossier over 73 pages detailed the unauthorized use of royal fonts, insignia, and imagery. Every potential infringement, from miniature crowns to heraldic patterns, was cross-referenced against official archives. The message was clear. The Crown would not permit emotional narratives to override legal precedent. The enforcement of intellectual property was not mere formality, it was institutional preservation. Simultaneously, the palace reinforced symbolism. Princess Catherine's appearances became increasingly calculated, each one layered with historical significance. A visit to a London hospital revealed subtle yet deliberate gestures. A replica coronet of Prince George displayed alongside official charitable material, a nod to continuity and responsibility. Staffers noticed that even the smallest interactions with children, adjusting a sash, offering a symbolic pin, were imbued with careful messaging. George was being portrayed as both heir and exemplar, embodying centuries of ceremonial rigor. Charlotte and Louis, too, were positioned in contexts emphasizing engagement and duty. In stark contrast, images of Archie in California, while wholesome, lacked the ceremonial weight and narrative authority the palace carefully cultivated. The legal front became increasingly active. Within hours of the first royal reclamation book release, cease and desist letters were dispatched to multiple vendors, including digital platforms hosting promotional material. Streaming services complied promptly, removing content referencing royal titles or emblems. Palace aides monitored responses, noting both compliance and resistance. For Harry and Meghan, each takedown amplified the perception of conflict, fueling arguments about overreach or censorship. Internally, however, the Crown framed these moves as protective, not punitive. The goal was not confrontation, but containment. Symbol, narrative, and law were aligned to safeguard generational legitimacy. Media coverage followed the fault lines of perception. American outlets highlighted personal grievance, framing the narrative as maternal advocacy. UK tabloids emphasized continuity, duty, and historical precedent. Social media, once dominated by Meghan's hashtags, now reflected a growing awareness of the Crown's calculated response. Not My Prince trended less, Future of the Crown gained traction. Analysts noted that public sentiment was shifting subtly but decisively. Narrative fatigue set in. Audiences grew wary of repeated comparisons between children whose lives could never be equitably measured. The palace's strategy of quiet, deliberate action began to dominate headlines without a single official statement. Prince Harry, caught between public expectation and private loyalty, navigated a precarious path. He returned to London under the pretext of family consultation, but was in fact reviewing legal options, media strategy, and potential interventions to support Meghan's messaging without infringing institutional boundaries. Reports confirmed private meetings with Princess Anne and senior advisors, focusing on conflict de-escalation while preserving Archewell's public brand. Anne's earlier assertion, "one cannot reconcile with tactics," remained a guiding principle. It became increasingly clear any overt action from Harry risked amplifying Meghan's narrative. Inaction risked passive concession. The line between loyalty and strategy blurred. Amid this, the Crown subtly intensified ceremonial messaging. Royal archives, previously accessible to scholars, were selectively highlighted in media reports to underscore historical consistency. Educational initiatives, trust-related events, and public service campaigns showcased George, Charlotte, and Louis not as political instruments, but as living embodiments of constitutional duty. Each act of visibility reinforced a narrative Meghan could not alter. Royal succession was embedded in service, responsibility, and continuity. Attempts to draw emotional equivalencies between Archie and George faltered in contrast to these highly curated demonstrations of legitimacy. By mid-March, internal monitoring of the Sussex media campaign revealed miscalculations. Royal Reclamation's messaging, intended to cultivate sympathy, now generated public scrutiny of methods rather than mission. Social media debates increasingly questioned ethical implications of monetizing perceived injustices. Partnerships previously aligned with Archewell paused campaigns, citing reputational concerns. Streaming platforms implemented additional oversight. Even sympathetic commentators noted the tension between advocacy and exploitation. Every attempt to elevate Archie by contrasting him with George highlighted a gap between narrative intention and public reception. The palace, for its part, continued to act silently but strategically. Legal reinforcement, symbolic action, and selective media exposure created a triangulated defense of legitimacy. Each move was measured to withstand scrutiny. No press conferences, no direct rebuttals, only visible acts and legal enforcement. Internally, courtiers described the situation as containment through presence. The contrast between Meghan's amplified messaging and the Crown's enduring symbolism became increasingly stark. In California, Meghan persisted, yet each campaign inadvertently underscored the monarchy's stability and cohesion. George's appearances, Charlotte's engagements, and Louis's ceremonies carried weight Meghan could not replicate. As February drew to a close, the palace's careful orchestration of legacy and symbolism began to crystallize. While Meghan continued her media campaign from California, emphasizing the narrative of exclusion, the Crown relied on restraint, strategic visibility, and legal authority to assert enduring legitimacy. Every public engagement, every ceremonial appearance of George, Charlotte, and Louis reinforced the hierarchy that had been quietly under siege. By now, the distinction between entitlement and earned privilege had become unmistakably clear. Royal titles, ceremonial roles, and institutional influence were not subject to personal sentiment. They were the product of duty, continuity, and precedent. Within Buckingham Palace, advisors reported unprecedented alignment. King Charles, Princess Anne, and Prince William coordinated to ensure that no action, symbolic or legal, could be misconstrued as favoritism or reactionary aggression. Legal teams monitored every product, every statement, every social media post originating from Archewell Enterprises. Cease and desist orders continued to be dispatched where necessary, but more often, the Crown's strategy relied on subtlety. A gesture, a public appearance, a quiet reaffirmation of tradition. Public perception began shifting perceptibly. Audiences, fatigued by media amplification of grievance, increasingly recognized the deliberate architecture of royal continuity. Princess Catherine emerged as the linchpin of this phase. Her appearances became carefully curated lessons in presence and responsibility. Charity visits, school engagements, and archival exhibitions showcased the Windsor children not merely as heirs, but as exemplars of service. In London, she was photographed kneeling beside young students, adjusting ceremonial pins, offering guidance, and embodying the principle that privilege must be matched with duty. These acts were subtle, almost invisible to the casual observer, yet resonated profoundly with those attuned to royal symbolism. Every image, every interaction underscored the separation between ceremonial inheritance and public opinion. Meanwhile, Harry's position became increasingly complex. Private sources confirmed meetings with senior advisors and Princess Anne at Gatcombe Park, where he was briefed on the legal, symbolic, and constitutional implications of Meghan's campaigns. He was urged to temper public commentary while supporting his family privately. Analysts noted that Harry's role had shifted from active participant to intermediary, navigating personal loyalty, public expectation, and institutional boundaries with caution. This was not capitulation, it was strategic recalibration. Silence, it became evident, could wield more influence than words. The culmination of the Crown's strategy arrived with the revelation of Queen Elizabeth's sealed letter, made public in late February. Addressed to the Lord Chamberlain and dated shortly before her passing, it explicitly entrusted succession, titles, and ceremonial dignity to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Within its brief lines, the late monarch reaffirmed that titles were privileges tied to service, not sentiment, and that duty, once abandoned, could not be retroactively claimed. This disclosure, though ceremonial, carried immense weight. For the public, it provided clarity. For Meghan, it was an irrevocable statement of institutional intent. The message was definitive. The monarchy would continue, anchored in precedent, unaffected by narrative amplification. By early March, media narratives began to stabilize. Meghan's royal reclamation brand faced increased scrutiny, and key partnerships were paused or cancelled. Public sentiment, both in the UK and abroad, increasingly favored the message of measured continuity over emotional advocacy. Interviews, social media campaigns, and streaming content promoting Archie's elevation faced legal reviews or removal. Observers noted that even sympathetic commentators framed the narrative as a cautionary tale. Personal grievance cannot redefine centuries of constitutional practice. Internally, the palace regarded the episode as a test of resilience. The dual pressures of public scrutiny and media amplification had been met with discretion, strategic symbolism, and legal precision. Historical precedent was reinforced, institutional authority preserved, and the continuity of succession secured. George, Charlotte, and Louis emerged as unambiguous heirs not only in name, but in public perception, ceremonial function, and constitutional legitimacy. The Crown's endurance was not in silence alone. It was in deliberate, visible, and sustained action. Ultimately, Meghan's attempt to rewrite the narrative by comparing Archie to George did not falter due to censorship or confrontation. It failed because the Crown's power was structural and enduring. Symbolism, legality, ceremony, and tradition coalesced to create a narrative no single campaign could overturn. While Archie's public profile remained elevated through celebrity channels, the constitutional hierarchy and ceremonial authority remained unequivocal. Privately, Harry accepted that the institution's decisions were guided by duty rather than emotion. In the end, the Crown endured unshaken. Emotional narratives, however persuasive, could not overwrite institutional authority. Archie and Wyatt retained their identities, but the distinction between familial affection and constitutional authority had been cemented. Meghan's campaign highlighted personal perception versus institutional continuity, but the monarchy's response proved timeless. Resilience, strategy, and service prevail over grievance and comparison. The narrative war concluded not with headlines, but with enduring structure, ceremonial affirmation, and legal clarity. Legacy, as always, belonged to those who honor duty.